Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Kay. I thank you for your time today. I hope you've had a good conference so far. I think this is kind of like last call, right? So you don't have to go home, but you can't stay. Anyway, yeah. So we are here. Oh, by the way, I should introduce Allie. Allie and I put this presentation about personas together for you. And by the way, this is almost the rest of the UX team at InterSystems. There are 6 of us all together, and we've been here for I've been here almost 2 years. It's been a lot of work across a lot of different. We cover all the zones of InterSystems, so we're a little bit outnumbered. But our job is really to improve the user experience to improve everyone's experience of InterSystems. And our focus is mainly on products. The products and data platforms, track care, health share, all this stuff. And a part of this, right, one of the places we start when we think about how do we improve the experiences, we start with users, right? And so this is all about that. Small group, so if you have questions, please ask. Don't let me ramble on. Just interrupt and ask what you'd like to ask. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things, right? We'll talk just a moment about users, and we'll talk about personas that are sort of archetypal users, right? They're descriptors for users that help keep users in your face. And we'll talk about a method for creating users that's sort of a workshop-based experience that can help you create personas, create this proto persona idea, right? To put users into your thinking about your product experience. So first, let's do a little exercise. I'd like you to think of an experience. So when you think of any experience, it can be really anything, right? So driving a car, buying a car, using the elevators over here. It can be checking into the conference, right? Any of that stuff. So fix something in your mind. And the question is not so much what the experience is, but how would you describe that experience, right? What adjectives would you use to describe that experience that you've had? So if I'm thinking about the elevators, I can think of a lot of they seem comfortable. So what words, in thinking about your experiences, what words would you use to describe your experiences? Let's take a second. Allie's going to make some notes. So how would you? Somebody jump in. Give us an idea. Frustrating. Okay. What else? Slow. We're all thinking about elevators now. Sorry about that. What other experience? What else? How else would you describe things? Surprising. Okay. As a positive thing. Okay. Unorganized. And I'm assuming that's the bad column, right? Okay. What else? Confusing. Okay. Costly. Okay.
They're a little bit easier actually because you can just press it on the outside and let it come to you. You don't have to get out with a bunch of people and you have a parent elevator and all coordinating which one you want to go to. So
Okay. Okay, easier, simpler, right? With that, okay. So this is interesting, right? We could. What else? What else have you got? Smooth. All right. So let me put some of these things up here. So we magically pre-filled some things. right? So when you think about experiences, the good side of experiences, things like easy use, simple, right? Some of these things. Oh, and clear, helpful, and then let's get the bad ones up there. Okay. So we can describe, right? We can describe experiences, and honestly, a lot of the words we would use to describe an experience are kind of similar across experiences, right? Because really, it's about having. Actually, first of all, everything comes with an experience. That's one thing, right? No matter what you're doing, if you're doing it, it's an experience. I mean, that just kind of duh. But the issue is that your sort of judgment of that experience has to do with your perspective, right? Does this thing meet your expectations? And how well does it meet your expectations? And the reason I start here is because everything comes with an experience, and that includes the products that we are building for customers, right? And if we don't think about those customers and the experience and those users in particular and the experience that they will have, then we risk sort of not solving the problem for them, right? We risk setting expectations that we can't achieve or something like that, right? And so that's why I sort of worry so much about experience, and that's why when we think about design, I start from the point of view of the user. And that's kind of how it is, right? The problem is that users they're hard, right? There's a lot of them. They all have particular ways of expressing themselves. All of them seem to have different kinds of perspectives, right? And because there are so many of them, it's actually really hard for us to keep that perspective in mind. Okay, so before we go on, we're gonna tell the rest of this story from the perspective of an example. So as of this moment, we are in this room. Welcome to the Software Kitchen. We are all part of this startup. I think we're at Series A right now. This imaginary company is doing this imaginary product, and I want to using this example is basically so that we can talk about a user group that everybody can relate to, right? So there's no problems of perspective there or translation. The product that we're trying to build is this online, some kind of online cooking app. Okay, so with that scene set, let's sort of tell the rest of the story, right? So if we're talking about some kind of recipe book or some cool thing like that, let's think about the users who we're building this for, right? So next question for the group. I want in your mind, think of a user or somebody who would cook at home, right? Who might be in the population that uses this interactive app. So it might be my parents, right? My mom cooked. I remember her cooking. I won't say whether she was good or not at this, but I'm here. It's all right. So who else? So what other types of users would you think of in this case, right? Who are the kinds of users who might be using an online cooking app to help them in the kitchen? Who would that be?
My husband.
My husband. Okay. Who else? Student. Yep. Okay. Student. Anyone else?
Kids. A busy professional with kids.
Busy professionals with kids.
Personal chef.
My personal chef. Oh, okay. That's helpful. Anyone else in this range? So we've already been at this for 20 seconds. We've sort of got a fairly wide range of user types, right, and user individuals. So the question is, right, I mean, the issue is when we think about users and a user population, right, that we all sort of arrive at we sort of form different pictures in our heads. turns out there's a way around this, right? So this is, right, the different pictures in our heads, right? We're sort of talking about maybe a misalignment, right? So if we have a software project team, and since this is our, right, we're in the software kitchen here, if we all have a different image in our heads, then we may arrive at the wrong sort of conclusion, right? We may decide that something is important for our software that's not a match with everybody else, right? And then we have disagreements. This really starts from a problem of perspective. So one way we can do this is we can actually talk specifically about that, right? As a group, we can think about these things called personas. They're basically, they're made up, I call them imaginary friends, but they didn't want me to put that in the title. They are archetypal users, right, who are based on facts that we can construct and that we can all agree on, and who will help us, even though they're fictional, but they can help us stay focused on the right set of users for the task that we're doing, right? They can help us do all kinds of things, set priorities, set scope, that kind of stuff, right? The problem is that traditional persona development processes are very involved, right? They start with a set of users, right? So you got to do a bunch of interviews and say, okay, let's talk to real people, gather a bunch of data. Then we do a bunch of analysis, right? So look at this stuff. And some of this, by the way, is abstracted from a persona project I did quite a few years ago. And this took between 4 and 6 months to do. So it's also a very long, time-consuming problem. We do a bunch, again, more analysis, synthesis, checking things out. Let's map some workflows. Let's describe some stuff. Let's do a little bit more analysis, right? I don't know who that is. Again, we keep going, right? The goal is to sort of interview more folks and pull all this information together, sort of form an understanding, right? Tell a complete picture. Oh, look, now we've got some segmentation coming in, right? Again, all of this stuff takes time. And let's get to the end of the story here. So eventually, let's get to the end of the story here. Eventually, we wind up with a bunch of personas. Problem is, it's taken a very long time. It's been very expensive, and a lot of the team hasn't been involved all the way along, so they may or may not be invested in this thing, right? So this is sort of the problem with personas in a traditional way. So given that, right, and given the fact that in fact, from the last time I created personas in this sort of very formal way, we did all this nice stuff. We had a wonderful launch. We showed all these things up, right? We did posters and so on and so forth, and then people ignored them ever after, right? So fortunately, these days we have this method, and actually this is where Proto Personas enter into it, right? So we have a method that can actually get us started with personas. It's very quick to generate. Can help us, can actually get the whole team involved in the creation of these things, right? And it essentially gets us started with proto-personas. They're proto-personas or assumptive personas. There's lots of different words for this, but they're basically, call them tentative personas. They're based on what we already know. We get them created, we get them into the process. The team is part of the creation of these things, so they're invested in this. And then what we can do with that is we can continue to vet them later. But let's talk about that in a second. The cool thing about proto-personas, right? So I spent a lot of time when these things first started appearing in the world, I did spend a lot of time resisting the idea, right? No, if you can't do a real persona, it's not worth it. It's like, you know what? Actually, it's better to do something and get started than it is to say, I'm not doing anything unless I can do the real thing, and I'll never have 6 months to do that, because very few companies anymore will be willing to invest in that level of detail. So what we've got is a workshop we'll go through the steps really quickly, and then we can talk about some of the details, right? So typical to a workshop, you've got stuff to prepare. Set out, essentially what we want to do is arrive at an objective statement. You want to think about the people who should actually participate in this workshop, and that includes that would include the core team, right? So us, but we also might want to include stakeholders, might want to include people from marketing, wherever, right? Who might know something about the user, the audience that we're actually aiming this product at. Then the usual, right? Supplies and a place to do it, right? So we could use this room. We'll clear the chairs. We'll do some persona creation. So in our case, right, for this thing, our objective statement is to create proto personas for this imaginary product that we're building, right? That's the simplest expression. There we are. Makes sense, right? So the next thing that we want to do is actually identify the users of this thing, right? And this is where we so this is where, essentially, this is a little bit of a brainstorming exercise. One way we've done this, and we did this for Jeff Fried, who's the head of product development, so data platforms, product management, and you saw him doing a good show in the keynote this morning. He's very fond of these things, and it's sort of part of his basic, fundamental thing for new project work that his team is doing to start with the set of users who this would be aimed at. So we did this with him right after I arrived at InterSystems. We did a version of this, and I, if you're interested, I do have a bootleg copy of that I can show you. But basically, let's list users, right? So in our case, for our example, we're looking for home cooks. Who are those? So we mentioned some of them before, right? Busy parents with kids, students, refresh my memory. What else do we say?
Personal chef.
Oh, there we are. Never mind. Don't refresh my memory. It's right there. Thanks, Allie. My husband. Yeah, that's it. Kids, busy professionals. There we are. Personal chef. Right. So the goal is to create as complete a list as you possibly can. Right. That's so we're done. Okay. Stop. Well, there's another bit of the list. Anybody I'm missing? So we got party host, we got a health-conscious home chef. So there we are. So from here, right, once we have a sort of a sense of the population you're aiming this at, the next thing we want to think about are the attributes of that audience, right? So what are the things that what kinds of things would we use to describe this audience, or what attributes of each of these user types would we think about, right? So in this case, actually, let me just get started. One attribute might be the food budget that each of these individuals has, right? So when we think about, for example, a student, somebody who's a student, the student budget is not the same as a family budget. Right, so that we'd expect some difference. The budget that a professional chef might actually be willing to spend on food is going to be different from probably everybody else, right? So there's that kind of thing. What other actually, bring these up. So level of experience, little chef icon, how cool. Who are we cooking for, right? What's the number? That kind of stuff. And then the type of cooking you're talking about, right? Is this just practical, survival level cooking, or is it gourmet sort of party level stuff, right? And so these attributes and others are the kinds of things we'd think about when we generate, right? When we're thinking about this audience, we want to sort of try to identify the things that would distinguish them, right? That would distinguish all these users. Anything else that comes to mind for our cooking group?
Time available.
Time available. Yeah, huge one, right? So we're certainly missing that. What else?
I just think if they're like tech savvy, like there's some people just not gonna look at online stuff.
Tech savvy, yep. If they're tech savvy, they're not looking at online stuff, absolutely. It's a key piece, right? Because we're building an app. I think we made an assumption
Okay.
that we,
That's your-
no, I think we should add it. I think it should be in there. What else? I think we were wrong. Any other things that we're missing here? Because part of this, by the way, part of this whole process is that it has to be very fluid, right? The set of users you have are going to influence the attributes. The attributes might actually help you identify users later. So think of all of this as sort of living documentation, right? And the goal is to move quickly through it, but be willing to kind of iterate, right? There's nothing, none of these things are really ever set in stone. So the goal is they grow with you. Yeah, what else? Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to think about this set of users that we have, and we want to sort of consider them in order, right? One of the reasons we want to do this is we're going to be doing some writing, right? We're going to be creating some of these personas in this part of the workshop. And we want to make sure that we're actually writing about the most important ones first, right? So that if we don't get to some at the end of the list, we're not that worried about them, right? So in our case, we've got sort of a bit of an organization. Test my work here, see if that makes sense. We're putting novice, right? This novice user, right, who might be this student, for example. We're putting them first because we kind of think of this app, for one reason or another, is sort of an educational piece, right? It's like, show me how to do stuff. In this case, we were talking about a professional chef, right? Somebody's personal chef. That individual, I don't think, appears here, but I might put them pretty low down here, right? Because I'm not expecting them to need to reference much, except maybe some particular recipe, right? They don't need a refresher on a souffle or anything. Maybe they do. Our app, we're probably not deciding that. If that sounds okay, we can continue, right? So prioritize, again, just so you make sure you pick things off in the right order. Does that make sense? And cool. So now we've got our list, we've got our attributes. Now we get to write. At this point, we're going to take these personas that we've got. We're going to write about them. Again, these are assumptive personas. They're based on sort of what we already know. So the goal, I think, is to write kind of quickly, right? Get the draft down, and then we'll review it as a group. When you do these personas, it helps to start with a template. The template is really up to you and whatever matters to you. So there are lots of different persona templates out on the web. None of them are right. What's right is the information that matters to you, okay? So for us, we'll start with just a little bit of stuff. These are fictional people, so fictional people should have a name. We can use a photograph, a little bit of other information, again, because we're trying to describe someone who could be a reasonably three-dimensional person. We've got some other stuff here. So a short bio, again, because a story helps. A little bit of motivation and goals. A thing that we don't have here might be, we might add risks, for example, or pain points, right? What bothers them most, especially if we're talking about software, not about cooking, right? When we get down for a real product, we know there are pain points, right? We were just in the deep sea presentation last hour, and we heard some pain points. Those are probably important to record. They represent opportunities, right? What else do we have? And then some attributes, right? So these are the attributes that we put on the slide. As we just mentioned, there are a couple that are actually missing, like tech savviness. And then there's this other thing that are sort of resources. These might be inspirational pieces and so on. Goal is we would take this room, we'd take the list of personas, we'd divide up into either individuals or small groups. Everybody would get a persona or two to write. They would take this template, fill that in. That's it. Very simple. We'd time box this, by the way, so that we wouldn't spend all day. We don't have all day. We have, say an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. We're going to spend a certain amount of that time doing this writing. So we've done a few for you, just like a good cooking show. We have a cake in the oven already. So here we've created a persona. This individual is a student, pretty much what you'd expect. So thinking about so think about Sam's story, right? He just wants to, not on the dining plan anymore or something like that, right? Moved into an apartment with 3 friends. That's great. They're probably already arguing. But Sam wants to cook at home. So we're gonna help him do that, right? Take a look at the tension bars over there, the scales, right? This sort of tells me how much, roughly at a glance, right? How much money, how much experience, that kind of stuff. Does this, when you think about student, does this match more or less? Cool. So what we'll do at the end of this, we're gonna, if this were for real workshop, I'd print this thing out, I'd put it on the wall somewhere, and then we'd get to go around and read it and critique, right? Because the goal is, again, is to check our understanding. Does that actually agree with all of us, right? So there's a little bit of a consensus building thing. And resources, right? These are sort of inspirational things that that Sam looks as places he might use now to sort of look up cooking recipes, right? Okay, a couple other of these personas. We've got frazzled Fran, somebody in a hurry. So this is our family, a family cook, right? Someone who has, time is at a premium. Highly distracted, right? And that's every home ec cookbook, a textbook will tell you shouldn't be distracted in the kitchen. And so this is, right, here's an individual that might actually benefit from something like this, right? Maybe. Again, we'd print these out, you guys would get to do a review, we'd say, yeah, are we right or wrong? Or are we missing something? This is an individual who we think is going to be, likes to host parties, right? So this actually raised, while we were sort of making this stuff up, this actually raised a question, right? So if Holly is a party host, how often is she doing that? And is our app, it's a legitimate question to ask, right? Is the purpose of our app to help people do that? Or is it something is she cooking so infrequently that she probably wouldn't be a steady user? Something, again, a part of the thing to think about, right? Last one. So here, this is an individual who's worried about their health. They want to cook healthy, do some healthy cooking, right? And that's so. This is the kind of thing we're thinking about. So again, if you look at the tension bars, it looks like Helen is willing to spend a fair amount of money, right? She's willing to dedicate a fair amount of her budget to food. She has a fair amount of experience, not quite pro chef level, but is the dial on healthy is all the way over here, right? Cool. So we have all these users, right? And we'd probably have a few more, and so on and so forth, right? We've imagined that we've had them printed out, we got them on the wall, and we've all looked at them, we had come to some broad agreement about what they are, maybe made some edits and so on and so forth. What, right? We've got a bunch of sort of, so far, imaginary data points. Cool. What do we do with all that stuff? Well, the next step to this, and this is really sort of where we finish, the point of this synthesize all that information and make sort of help us make some sense of it, right? So imagine the way I've done this before is I've used a whiteboard. We've drawn all the tension bars on the whiteboard, and what we do, right? And actually, this is also we'd add on the whiteboard. We'd add a couple more tension bars, especially technical savviness, and then what we do is we take everybody's points on that tension bar, and we take a look at where they map out, right? So the goal here is to look for a couple of things, right? So look for overlaps, right? Are there places where these users are really the same, right? So a novice cook who is a student may actually be, that's one thing, right? A novice, if there's another type of cook who's a novice, maybe we don't need both, right? So the goal is to have a manageable number of these personas. In our case, we've only represented 4, so probably pretty good, enough to keep in mind. But that's kind of where we're after. The other thing you want to look for are gaps. Any huge gaps in this synthesis. If this actually looks pretty good. If there are huge gaps in the synthesis, right? If there's a user missing because you can see kind of a big blank space where they should be, then maybe you want to think about, is there a persona that actually fit in that, right? And that's a bit of creativity that might appear. Again, our example is almost mathematically precise, but that's really where this is. So there's a couple of things that come out of this, right? While we're talking about who these users are, and while we're talking about this piece of software, we wind up getting alignment on what is important for this particular piece of software, right? So it helps us actually talk about the software. It helps us get out of our own heads when we're talking about that software, right? So it's not just our perspective, it's these people's perspective, right? These hypothetical people's perspective. So perspective, alignment. Because of that, it helps us deal with scope, right? So because there's always more than we can do in whatever time frame. If we're aiming at an MVP or aiming at some whatever golden Cadillac future, this will help us sort of put the most important things first. So I think it eliminates some of the guesswork. The other thing we've got is we've got a basis for going forward, right? So one of the things we want to be able to do, so one of the things we actually want to be able to do is put these personas to use, right? So these personas help us decide what it is we need to build first, who are the primary users of this software, right? So setting one of the things, and actually one of the things that I found that we're still learning at InterSystems is we try to build a product for absolutely everybody, right? We don't rule anyone out, and that's a great idea. It's hard to focus in that kind of environment, right? So for us to sort of narrow things down a little bit and say, actually, we are aiming at that, right? An analyst or a developer or a DevOps individual. If we can say that, then it sort of gives us actually a little more freedom to sort of aim squarely at that individual, knowing that generally everybody else who has a stake in this will probably be able to use the piece of software that we're building. And the last thing I'll say, by the way, these are, again, we know these are assumptive. They're just the beginning. They're profiles. As we bring these to the real world, right, as we actually talk to customers and users, we should be evaluating them, continuing to fill them in, right? As it turns out we're missing something from the student, or there's an aspect of the student we want to deal with, we should probably continue to fill them in. Again, living documents, that's at least always the intention. So I sort of talked about this already. There we are. Let's finish. So we've got in this case, again, you see how relatively simple it is. And by the way, for all of our environments are slightly different. So when you're thinking about a workshop like this, if there are things that work or won't work, particular to your culture, particular to the problem you're solving, adjust. Feel free, right? This is meant to be conversation. Anything that gets in the way of conversation, get rid of it. Let's make sure you're talking about the right stuff in some kind of agreement. This'll wherever we post these things, this will be available. Run it yourself or call me. I can talk you through this in detail if you like. In the meantime, we've sort of reached the end. I can stop for questions, and we've got 8 or 9 minutes left. I can sort of bootleg some of the personas that we created if you like, if you want to see those. Otherwise, we'll take questions if you've got them.
How do you manage different personas, like on an ongoing basis, like as you onboard new users to your software?
So the question is, how do I manage personas as you onboard new users? So in other words, if there's good question. So I'll tell you what we did in the data platforms team. We have a Confluence site. We created a spreadsheet with all the personas on it, and we posted all the personas on a Confluence site. And then what we've done is we've given all especially the product managers in data platforms, we've given them sort of the assignment to decide whether their particular personas are represented. Right? It's like, oh, we're looking for a BI analyst, but there isn't one there. I can either edit one that's there, I can create one and post it. So we've had, over the past year and a half or so, we've had a few added. We haven't deprecated any, so I think we're at 19, which is probably way too many. 19 across data platforms. So what I haven't done and probably should do is actually look for the ones that aren't used at all. Say, you know what, are these actual users, or did we just make something up that we don't need?
No, go ahead.
No, there's a couple of listeners here for which I'm wondering, are you already using the personas, maybe not under that name, but do you already do this sort of user-based checking and validation of your personas that you?
So right. So I'll repeat it for the mic. So customers already using personas or something like it to do software product development. And user stories they lead to it, right? I mean, they start from the user's perspective. That's really the point. So a good start. This may help keep everybody organized and keep everybody on the same page. Who else? Oh.
It's not a question. The things that became immediately apparent was like maybe most people wanted like cheap and one person wanted like expensive, so maybe you would make your recipes, most of them, but this, and then like, it helps you figure out what percentage of how you want to spread your recipes out. And also maybe if there was no professional chefs, you would like go and make sure that you can't think of another user that was, and then you could just eliminate that from if you can't find a good use. I just thought I made it very clear.
Maybe, right.
Yeah, maybe.
It's a good point. And one of the things you might do is there may be legitimate need for experience versus not experience, right? For example, it's part of the team's decision to say, you know what, we will focus on this, or maybe we've got a primary user and a bunch of secondaries or something like that. So it's actually to point out those kinds of things and make those points of discussion more clear. What else? Other questions? Oh.
Considering the data platforms example, say that there are 5 products that data platforms offers, and you're creating personas based on a set of combination of products that a persona uses.
Yeah.
If you were to blindly create a personas, there would be at least 32 of them, and probably all 32 probable personas. Like there could be a combination where someone uses products 1 and 3, 2 and 4, etc.
Yeah.
So how would you how frequently would you update those 32 and look at your customer base and then say that, all right, these 19 aren't working, these 13 are?
Ideally, again, we've been pretty sloppy about it with the personas we've created. Ideally, there's sort of an ongoing evaluation, right? So I've had a couple of the product managers and data platforms say, you know what, we're missing this one. Haven't had anyone say, yeah, we've got we've got some that we're not using anymore, but that's always harder to find anyway, right? So as long as we've got a set of personas, actually, you guys what's your process? So we got some folks who are doing it, using those personas. You want to talk about what your sort of method is, or do you just sort of look at the list and pick the few?
I'll start.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think one thing we do is try to identify when we're thinking of something new that we want to do, which personas it affects. So we might, when we write down an idea for a feature, we say this is for these 2 or 3 personas. So I think, Paul, it's a good idea is to go back and look at that and say, are there any that we're not, that we haven't ever added to the list? I don't know. Do you want to add?
That's it. Does that helpful?
Yeah.
I can. I can show you a couple of the personas we have. They're. Oh, yeah.
Well, I had a question, and it's pretty much related to what we just discussed. But one of the objectives, I guess, is at some point to be able to focus and prioritize something, is to sort them out.
Yep.
Which ones are the most important for us?
Yes.
I saw in the previous slide you attached some percentages. The challenge with that is when you are in a startup environment, it's really hard to know exactly how many of those you have out there. Any
Yeah.
clues? any way to find that out?
It can be difficult, but I think one of the goals, especially in the startup environment, right? So it can be hard to find out what your market base is, right? So there are sort of the usual tools you can use, right? So personas don't really offer anything to that. You need to go for the usual set of tools that marketing would supply, right? So segmentation and other things. Unfortunately, that can be really expensive. But I think honestly, for some of these things, it's a bit of guesswork.
Yeah,
Go.
I wanted
Jump in.
to add to that maybe indeed it's not necessarily simple if you're starting out, but what also helped us, or definitely me, with these personas is that those little things like the bio that add character to it, that make it a story. So as Carmen just said, when we're thinking about a new feature or thinking about a new product or a problem that we want to solve, that's also part of a story. And you've got to cross-reference your problem story with your persona story. And if it doesn't match, go adapt the story so that at least you have a story that's consistent and that you can tell to customers. So if you keep focusing on the one, then if you keep focusing on a problem, you may start to try and solve it pure technologically, and without at times kind of taking that step back and looking at the users who are going to use it, you kind of lose touch. So they kind of influence one another and eventually lead to a story. Well, that was a bit of rambling, wasn't it?
No, that's. But I think you're
Sorry,
right.
I want to just jump in. The other thing with a startup is that you can build metrics into it, so you can find out what people use, which may actually build back to the persona, which I think that's an advantage of a startup. Yeah. So
Cool.
we should do that for our cooking app for sure.
We should. All right. I'm glad you're on the team.
Yeah.
All right. So we're at time. Why don't we can call it here? Happy to talk after. That's lunch. Let's do lunch. Thanks everybody for your time.